Frank Delgado. Hosted a wedding on my dock, so I let it drift into the middle of the lake. What would you do if someone hijacked your property and threw a wedding on it without asking you first? Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. One peaceful Saturday morning, I looked out my window and saw something I'll never forget: white tents, floral arches, and dozens of guests setting up a full-blown wedding, right on my dock. And the host, none other than Frank Delgado, the self-appointed king of our neighborhood. He thought I'd just stay quiet, but instead, I gave him a front-row seat to the most unexpected twist his wedding could ever take. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how this ceremony floated into internet history. The morning sun poured into Malik Thompson's bedroom, casting long shadows over the polished wooden floor. It was a Saturday, and unlike most Saturdays, Malik Thompson was already awake, though not because his alarm had gone off. Or no, it was the unmistakable sound of wedding music drifting through his open window that pulled him from his sleep. He groggily sat up and rubbed his eyes, trying to make sense of the melody. It wasn't just any wedding song. It was the kind of tune you'd hear during a cheesy romantic comedy played too loudly by a DJ who was trying way too hard to set the mood. Chuck squinted towards the window. His expansive backyard led directly to the dock, or where he often spent his early mornings sipping coffee and watching the ripples on Clearwater Lake. But today, something was off. There, on his pristine dock, white tents had sprouted up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Rows of chairs draped in crisp white cloths were neatly arranged. Floral arches perfectly sculpted with roses and ivy framed a spot at the end of the dock which seemed to be set for a wedding. He stood up and walked to the window, narrowing his eyes as he took in the full sight. There, standing near the setup with a beaming smile on her face, was none other than Barbara Whitmore, the president of the local HOA, and the woman who'd caused Malik Thompson more headaches than he cared to count. Barbara Whitmore waved at him enthusiastically like this was a friendly gesture, but there was something about that smile that felt more like a victory dance. Malik Thompson clenched his jaw. What the hell is she up to now, him? He grabbed his robe, stepped outside, and walked towards the dock. With every step, he could hear the music getting louder, and it was clear now. They were setting up for a wedding right on his property. As he got closer, he spotted a small folded sign propped up near the base of one of the flower arrangements. The words, HOA Event Approval, were printed across the top in bold letters. Malik Thompson's eyes shot wide open. Denise, he muttered under his breath. She had no right to do this. The dock was his. It was part of his property, something he'd worked hard for. And there she was, acting as if it was a public space for anyone to use at will. He reached the dock's edge where Barbara Whitmore stood, hands on her hips, looking satisfied with herself. When she saw Malik Thompson approaching, her smile widened. "Good morning, Malik Thompson. Beautiful day for a wedding, isn't it?" she said, her tone annoyingly chipper. Malik Thompson glared at her, his frustration mounting. "What is this, Denise? You can't just throw a wedding on my dock without asking me. You need permission from me, not the HOA. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "The lake belongs to the community, Malik Thompson. The dock's now shared space for all the residents. The HOA approved it. Everyone's happy." Malik Thompson's hands balled into fists at his sides. His heart rate quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "Denise, I'm giving you 1 hour to clear this all out, or nature's going to take care of it for you." Barbara Whitmore blinked, clearly unimpressed. "Nature. What are you going to do?" Malik Thompson stopped the wedding. The cocky, smug expression on her face only infuriated him further. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to get violent. He had something far better in mind. Malik Thompson gave her a tight smile. 1 hour you can take your chances, but if you don't leave, let's just say you're in for a real surprise." He turned and walked back toward his house, his mind already working. He wasn't the kind of man to engage in petty arguments. He was a man of action, calculated, cool-headed action. Once inside, Malik Thompson made his way to the small room where he kept his emergency tools. Among them was a remote, a simple device with a red button in the center. It was hooked up to a release mechanism he'd installed years ago just in case something went wrong. He'd forgotten all about it, honestly. But this was the perfect opportunity to put it to use. He grabbed the remote, took a seat on the porch, and settled in with a glass of lemonade. Through his binoculars, he watched as the wedding guests began to trickle in, oblivious to the storm that was coming. Malik Thompson smiled. This is going to be fun. The clock was ticking, and the music from the wedding ceremony continued to echo through the serene morning air. Malik Thompson sat back in his chair. Legs stretched out, a glass of lemonade in his hand, and a grin on his face as he kept his binoculars focused on the bustling scene on his dock. He could see the bride, a woman dressed in a pristine white gown, adjusting her veil, while a group of guests huddled around excitedly chatting and snapping photos. At this point, the stage was set. Malik Thompson wasn't going to let Barbara Whitmore get away with this blatant disrespect of his property. He had warned her, but from the look on her face earlier, it was clear that she hadn't taken him seriously. About 30 minutes had passed when Malik Thompson saw her walking toward him, her smile wide and mocking. He stood up, keeping his cool. "Malik Thompson, I see you're still sitting out here enjoying the view," Barbara Whitmore said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, and you're right. The dock does belong to you for now." She paused, glancing toward the dock with a self-satisfied glint in her eyes. "But once the wedding's over, it's going to be a part of the community. We've got permits. We've got approval. Everything's perfectly legal." Malik Thompson's gaze narrowed, but he didn't respond immediately. He simply watched her with the kind of calm that always unnerved people. The wind rustled the trees, the scent of fresh pine filling the air, and in the distance the ripples on the lake grew a little larger, as if nature itself was preparing for the coming storm. "Denise," he finally said, his voice steady, "I told you once I'm giving you 1 hour to clear this out. You're about to find out why I don't bluff." Barbara Whitmore raised an eyebrow and folded her arms, leaning against the wooden fence that separated the lawn from the dock. I'm sure you'll do something dramatic, Malik Thompson. But here's the thing. You can't do a thing about it. The community has spoken. This dock is no longer just yours." Malik Thompson took a slow, deliberate step forward. "This isn't about the dock being mine. This is about respect. You've been abusing your position as HOA president to control people's lives in this. This is where I draw the line." Barbara Whitmore smirked, clearly not concerned. "Look, I get it. You're upset, but it's just one little wedding, Malik Thompson. It's not going to hurt anything. Let it go and we can all move on." The smugness in her voice made Shock's blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral. "You've got another 30 minutes, Denise. After that, we'll see what happens." He turned on his heel and walked back to his porch, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. But inside, his mind was racing. He could already feel the adrenaline coursing through him. There was no way in hell he was going to let Barbara Whitmore get away with this. Not this time. As he sat back down, Malik Thompson's thoughts turned to the device in his hand. The remote. He had installed the quick-release system on his dock years ago as a safety measure, but it had never really been tested in a situation like this. Today it was going to serve a very different purpose. It was time for a little poetic justice. He looked at the clock on his phone. 30 minutes. That's all Barbara Whitmore had left before she found out just how much nature could handle. The ceremony continued, oblivious to the impending chaos. The bride and groom exchanged vows, their voices sweet and full of love, while guests smiled and clapped. It was all so perfect. And then, as if on cue, Malik Thompson clicked the red button on the remote. For a split second, nothing happened. And then, with a quiet click, the dock's connections released. Shaw could hear the unmistakable sound of the wood creaking as the entire structure began to slowly drift away from the shore. His heart raced in anticipation. At first, no one noticed. It wasn't until the chairs closest to the water started shifting that the guests began to look around, confused. The wedding planner, who had been overseeing the setup, rushed forward to stabilize the chair closest to the edge, but it was already too late. The first tent began to sway, then the second, and as if the entire structure had decided to fight back against the imposition, the flower arches toppled into the water. The wedding guests gasped, some starting to laugh nervously, others pulling out their phones to capture the unfolding scene. Malik Thompson could hear the faint sound of a woman's shrill voice yelling, "Is this part of the ceremony?" The band's music sputtered and cut out, leaving an eerie silence behind. The groom looked back in horror, but his voice was drowned out by the increasing panic around him. By the time the entire wedding setup had drifted several feet into the lake, it was clear to everyone that the wedding was for all intents and purposes over. Guests scrambled, some still holding phones, others looking for the fastest escape route. As the lake slowly consumed the lavish setup, Malik Thompson leaned back in his chair and took a slow sip of his lemonade, a satisfied grin curling at the corners of his lips. The show had just begun. The video was already being streamed across social media platforms as the guests' chaotic reactions made their way online. #Titanic2. The hashtags exploded, and in mere hours the clip was all over TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. The internet was having a field day. Malik Thompson allowed himself a moment to savor the sweet victory before he stood up, still grinning. He'd done it. He had used his own dock to send a message not just to Denise, but to the whole neighborhood. This was just the beginning. Malik Thompson sat back in his chair, his legs comfortably stretched out in front of him, and watched as the chaos continued to unfold on the now floating wedding site. Guests were scrambling in every direction. The bride was crying hysterically, and the groom stood frozen, looking utterly helpless. The beautiful flowers, the pristine white chairs, and the elegant arches he'd seen just hours ago were now bobbing in the lake, their pristine appearance tarnished by the water. He could hear the shrieks of some of the guests as they tried to move away from the slowly sinking dock. Some were waving their arms frantically, and others were jumping into the water trying to salvage the chaos. It was pure, unadulterated bedlam, and it was all playing out right on his dock. Despite the frenzy happening across the lake, Malik Thompson remained calm. He didn't need to be in the middle of it. His plan had been set into motion, and all he had to do now was watch the consequences unfold. With a satisfied smirk, he lifted his glass of lemonade to his lips and took another sip. There was no rush. Malik Thompson had known for some time that he needed to take action against Barbara Whitmore and her relentless HOA schemes. Her behavior had become unbearable. She'd tried to control everything in the neighborhood, from petty fines to ridiculous demands that infringed upon the residents' basic rights. But today, he'd taken a different approach. Today, he'd outsmarted her. The quick release system he'd set up on the dock years ago wasn't just a safety measure. It was Malik Thompson's secret weapon. He'd installed it after a near miss with a fishing boat years ago, wanting to ensure that, if anything ever went wrong, he could quickly release the dock from the shore. What he didn't expect was that one day it would come in handy to, execute a bit of poetic justice. The system had been installed with a simple remote control hidden inside a small box on his back porch. It wasn't flashy, just a small device with a big red button, one that Malik Thompson had barely given a second thought to over the years. But today the remote had a new purpose. Malik Thompson had spent months plotting his retaliation. He'd watched as Barbara Whitmore made her moves, carefully documenting each instance of her overreach. He had footage of her harassing neighbors, finding them for the smallest infractions, and manipulating her position for personal gain. And now the culmination of his strategy was unfolding in front of him. But he wasn't done yet. With the dock now adrift in the lake, the guests' panic still fresh, Malik Thompson decided it was time to go inside. He had work to do. Inside, the house was quiet. Malik Thompson crossed the polished wooden floor, his boots making a soft thudding sound with each step. He stopped in front of a large oak bookshelf, running his hand over the spines of the books. It was a comforting sight, the steady presence of things that had been around for years. And Shaq wasn't the type to make rash decisions or jump into confrontations. He preferred to plan to think things through, and when the time came, to strike hard. He walked toward the back room of the house where the small study had all of his files and notes, everything he'd gathered about Barbara Whitmore and the HOA. The piles of paperwork weren't much to look at, but they were important. He pulled out a folder labeled Barbara Whitmore and sat at the desk. Inside, he had copies of the complaint forms, photographs, emails, and even testimonies from neighbors who had been pushed around by Denise's HOA policies. Malik Thompson had one thing in mind: winning. He wasn't going to let her win this fight no matter what she tried next. And she would try. Of that, he was certain. As he flipped through the folder, his phone buzzed on the desk, and a quick glance at the screen told him exactly who it was. Denise. He stared at the number for a moment, letting it ring a few more times before he picked it up. His tone was calm, almost casual as he answered. Malik Thompson. Denise's voice came through loud and clear, tinged with frustration. What the hell did you do? You ruined everything. Malik Thompson raised an eyebrow. Did I? It looked like everything was going perfectly to me. Perfectly. My wedding is ruined. My reputation is shot. And now people are talking about you on social media. What's wrong with you? I'm going to make sure you pay for this. Malik Thompson could hear her huffing and puffing on the other end, but he stayed unfazed. Denise, relax. The wedding was nice while it lasted, wasn't it? I'm sure you'll get everything cleaned up in no time. This isn't over, Malik Thompson. You just wait. I'm sure it's not, Malik Thompson replied, his voice laced with a hint of amusement. But don't worry, I've got everything you need to worry about right here. He could practically hear her clenching her teeth. What are you talking about? I've got the proof, Malik Thompson said, a quiet confidence in his voice. And I'm ready to show it. I'll see you at the HOA meeting, Douglas Grantaro. With that, he hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair. He'd been expecting the call. He knew Barbara Whitmore would be furious, but it was all part of the plan. She would try to fight back, of course. She would attempt to claim that the wedding was authorized, that she had full control over the dock, and that Malik Thompson had violated some HOA rule. She might even try to escalate things, sending someone to harass him, or worse, trying to sue him for damages. But none of it mattered. Malik Thompson had the upper hand. He had the documents. He had the footage. And now he had the satisfaction of knowing that no matter what Barbara Whitmore tried, her days as HOA president were numbered. He'd already spoken to several neighbors who were fed up with her tyranny, and it wouldn't be long before the HOA board saw the light. With a satisfied grin on his face, Malik Thompson walked back outside, ready to watch his next move play out. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow across Clearwater Lake. The day was winding down. But for Malik Thompson, the fun had just begun. From his porch, he watched the last few stragglers scrambling to clean up the wreckage of Denise's wedding setup. The floating dock, now a chaotic mess of wedding chairs, flower arches, and disheveled decor, was slowly drifting farther from the shore. The soft ripple of the water gently rocking it as it floated in the center of the lake. Shaw leaned back in his chair, his feet resting on the railing, and took a sip of lemonade. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the storm that had just hit Denise's carefully constructed life. He couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction watching the chaos unfold. Thought it was like witnessing the final act of a play that had been building toward this exact moment, but now it was time for the next phase, the viral spectacle. By the time Barbara Whitmore and her guests had realized what was happening, it was already too late. The dog, once securely anchored to the shore, was now adrift in the lake, its once pristine condition ruined by the chaos of the wedding. Guests were jumping into the water to retrieve the floating chairs, while others tried to salvage their belongings. The bride was standing on what was left of the dog, looking utterly helpless as the water crept higher. Malik Thompson smiled to himself. It was the perfect scene. But what made it even better was the fact that everyone had witnessed it. The phones were already out, the guests recording every second of the unfolding disaster. And just as Malik Thompson had hoped, the footage started to spread like wildfire across social media. He hadn't even had to do much. Barbara Whitmore had, unknowingly, done all the work for him. By the time the video was uploaded, it was already being shared by hundreds of people. The hashtag Titanic2 was born, and it quickly gained momentum. Within hours, it was all anyone could talk about. Malik Thompson spent the next few hours sitting back and enjoying the fruits of his labor. He didn't need to be in the thick of things anymore. The damage had been done. The wedding had been ruined. Denise's reputation was in tatters, and he had the satisfaction of knowing that, at least for now, she had been taken down a notch. He pulled out his phone, checking the social media updates. There were dozens of viral clips already, some from guests at the wedding, others from bystanders who had caught the spectacle on their own devices. One video in particular stood out. A shaky handheld recording of the bride standing on the dock as it drifted further into the lake. She was yelling for help, her voice rising in panic, while the guests behind her were either laughing or recording the whole thing. The video had over 1 million views. Malik Thompson couldn't help but laugh. It was the kind of public humiliation that would stick with Barbara Whitmore for a long time. People were already starting to call her the Titanic bride. And the comments were flooding in. Some were mocking her for being so careless with the wedding setup. Others were incredulous that she had the nerve to think she could get away with such a blatant disregard for Malik Thompson's property. But for Malik Thompson, it wasn't just about the entertainment. This was a carefully calculated move, one that would put Barbara Whitmore in a position where she couldn't deny the consequences of her actions. It wasn't just about ruining her wedding. It was about sending a message to everyone in the neighborhood. Malik Thompson wasn't someone to be messed with. By the time night fell, the internet was buzzing with reactions to the viral video. People were starting to tag Barbara Whitmore in the post, calling her out for her arrogance and entitlement. Even news outlets had started picking up the story with headlines like Titanic2, that HOA wedding disaster at Clearwater Lake, splashed across local news sites. Some people were even calling it the best revenge story of the year. Denise, no doubt, was beside herself. Malik Thompson had heard that she had tried to call the police to report an act of vandalism on her wedding day, but that only added fuel to the fire. The more she reacted, the more people were gleefully watching the spectacle unfold. The more she protested, the more she became the butt of internet jokes. Shag knew what was coming next. Barbara Whitmore wasn't going to take this line down. She was going to retaliate, and she'd probably do so with all the power of her position as HOA president. But that was Zena. That was fine. In fact, that was exactly what Malik Thompson wanted. He had already anticipated her next moves, and he was ready for her. But before he could even think about the next phase of his plan, the phone rang. He looked at the screen. Sure enough, it was Denise. Malik Thompson answered with his usual calm. "Hello, Denise. I'm going to make you regret this." Barbara Whitmore spat, her voice shrill and panicked. "You think you've won. You have no idea what I can do to you." Malik Thompson chuckled. "I'm sure you'll try Denise. But here's the thing. You're going to have to do a lot more than make threats to fix this one. The whole neighborhood's already seen what you did, and the internet's loving it. The more you protest, the worse it gets." "Don't think this is over," she hissed, her voice seething with anger. "I'm going to wait to make sure you regret this. Just you wait." "I'm not worried," Malik Thompson said, the confidence in his voice unmistakable. "I'm enjoying the show. You should have thought twice before messing with my dock." Shock ended the call and leaned back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. He had no intention of letting this go. He had the upper hand now, and he wasn't about to back down. The viral humiliation was just the beginning. Barbara Whitmore had made one big mistake, and Malik Thompson was going to make sure she paid for it, but he was going to do it on his terms, calmly, strategically, and with a lot of planning. By the time the sun had set it, the internet was buzzing with activity. It wasn't just the local neighborhood that was talking about Denise's wedding disaster. It was the entire online world. #Titanic2 had gone viral, and the footage of the floating dock drifting away from the shore as the guests scrambled for cover had been shared thousands of times across every social media platform. What had started as a small-scale humiliation for Barbara Whitmore had quickly spiraled into something far bigger, and Malik Thompson couldn't help but smile as he scrolled through the posts, watching his plan unfold. The phone buzzed on the table in front of him. He glanced at the screen. It was a text from one of his neighbors, Jasmine Reed. She had been in the crowd when the dock started floating away and had a front-row seat to the spectacle. The message read, Malik Thompson, I just wanted to say I watched that wedding video like 5 times already. It's amazing. Barbara Whitmore deserved that, but it gets better. Have you seen the TikTok trend yet? Titanic2 is everywhere. It's insane. Malik Thompson chuckled and replied with a simple, "Glad you liked it. Let's hope Barbara Whitmore is enjoying her 15 minutes of fame." The messages continued to flood in, most of them laughing at Denise's expense, calling her the Titanic bride, or mocking her for thinking she could commandeer Malik Thompson's property for a wedding without any consequences. The public humiliation was snowballing, and with each passing minute, Malik Thompson felt more satisfied. It wasn't just about the dock anymore. It was about sending a message to everyone in the community that his property was not to be taken lightly. As the hours passed, the news outlets began picking up the story. The local channel ran a segment on the air HOA wedding disaster and the video of the dock drifting away, but what played in endless loops. Wasn't long before national news picked up the story as well. Headlines like, HOA wedding disaster. Bride floats away as Malik Thompson's dock drifts into the lake flashed across every screen. The comment section on every news website was full of memes, jokes, and people expressing their disbelief at how Barbara Whitmore had managed to turn her own wedding into a national spectacle. Malik Thompson could almost hear her seething from his porch. At around 10 p.m., his phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unfamiliar number. He didn't hesitate to answer. "Hello, Denise." Malik Thompson said, his voice calm and collected. "You think this is funny, don't you?" Denise's voice cracked with frustration. "You think you've won? Well, you haven't. I'm going to make sure you pay for this, Malik Thompson. You've crossed the line." Malik Thompson took a slow sip of his lemonade, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm sure you'll try, but you need to understand something, Denise. You started this. I didn't want to ruin your wedding. I just wanted to keep you from taking what wasn't yours. But you couldn't let it go, could you? I'm going to make sure you regret this." She spat, her anger palpable even over the phone. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." Malik Thompson's grin widened. "I'm not worried, Denise. You see, I've got all the evidence I need to prove that what I did was justified, but if you want to waste time on lawyers, go ahead. The HOA board will be hearing from me soon enough." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Malik Thompson could almost hear her grinding her teeth. "You'll regret this, Malik Thompson. I promise." "Maybe," he said, "but right now I'm too busy enjoying the show." With that, he ended the call and leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He had no intention of backing down now. Barbara Whitmore had picked the wrong fight. Now the whole world was watching. By the next morning, the story was still trending. The hashtags had gained millions of views on TikTok and Twitter, and people were recreating their own Titanic2 moments, parodying the wedding disaster in hilarious ways. The memes were everywhere. One showed the bride's face photoshopped onto the Titanic movie poster, while another compared the wedding party's frantic scrambling to the famous of the iceberg hitting the ship. Even Malik Thompson's friends and family were getting in on the fun. His brother sent him a text with a picture of the Titanic movie poster, adding, "You sure you're not in this movie, but bro?" Malik Thompson laughed and replied, "Guess the real disaster was underestimating me." But while the internet was having its fun, Barbara Whitmore wasn't so amused. Malik Thompson could already see the damage it was causing. Barbara Whitmore had been a fixture in the community, a self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules, and now she was the laughingstock of the entire neighborhood. Her once pristine reputation had been shattered. The sheer volume of negative comments and mocking memes was starting to take a toll on her. It was only a matter of time before the HOA board took notice, and they did. Hey, his Malik Thompson received an unexpected call that afternoon from one of his neighbors, Raymond Carter. "Hey, Malik Thompson, you might want to check your email," Raymond Carter said. "The HOA is having an emergency meeting, Douglas Grantaro. Word is they're going to vote on whether or not to remove Barbara Whitmore as a president." I don't think she can survive this." Malik Thompson's grin returned. It was happening sooner than he had expected. The backlash from the wedding disaster was spreading like wildfire, and Denise's position at the HOA was hanging by a thread. She had pushed too far, and now the community was turning on her. As the evening rolled in, Malik Thompson couldn't help but feel a sense of calm satisfaction. Barbara Whitmore had tried to manipulate the system for years, bullying neighbors and imposing unnecessary fines. But now the tides had turned. The community had seen her true colors, and they were ready to hold her accountable. Malik Thompson wasn't done yet, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was finally winning. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but Denise's fall from grace was imminent, and Malik Thompson was going to be there to see it happen. It wasn't just about the dock anymore. It was about justice and about letting the whole world know that when you mess with Malik Thompson, there are consequences. The following day, Malik Thompson awoke to the unmistakable sound of his phone buzzing on his nightstand. He reached over and picked it up groggy, but still anticipating what the day might bring. It was an email notification from one of his neighbors. He opened it to find the subject line: HOA Emergency Meeting, Douglas Grantaro. Malik Thompson raised an eyebrow. The email contained a brief but crucial message. If Malik Thompson were meeting Douglas Grantaro to discuss the aftermath of the wedding incident, it looks like the HOA board is considering a vote of no confidence for Barbara Whitmore. Your input might help push things over the edge. Let me know if you can attend. Very Craig. Malik Thompson's lips curled into a satisfied grin. He had known this was coming. The backlash was unavoidable. Barbara Whitmore had managed to alienate so many people with her tyrannical rule, and now the community was ready to take this chic action. This was the HOA war had officially begun. He quickly got dressed, his mind already running through the possibilities. The HOA meeting was going to be crucial, but Malik Thompson wasn't just going to show up and speak his piece. No, he had a strategy. He had been laying the groundwork for this moment for months, collecting evidence, speaking with neighbors, and making sure he had everything in place to win this battle. The next day, Malik Thompson arrived at the HOA's meeting venue, a modest community center just off the lake. As he walked in, he saw a few familiar faces, mostly neighbors who had come to support him. There was Raymond Carter, the man who had sent the email along with a handful of others who had been pushed around by Barbara Whitmore in the past. They all looked eager to take action, their eyes filled with determination. Chuck took a seat at the back, his eyes scanning the room. Barbara Whitmore was already sitting at the front looking tense, her fingers tapping anxiously on the table. Her usual air of self-assuredness had evaporated, replaced by something more fragile. She knew what was coming, but she was doing everything she could to maintain control. Malik Thompson noticed that the atmosphere was different today. People weren't avoiding eye contact like they usually did in HOA meetings. There was a sense of unity in the room, as if everyone finally felt empowered to stand up against her. The power dynamic had shifted, and Denise, once the queen of the HOA, was now on the defensive. The meeting was called to order, and the board members began discussing routine matters. Nothing of real consequence at first, but it didn't take long for the inevitable topic to surface. One of the neighbors, a woman named Patricia Lopez, raised her hand. "Can we get to the real reason we're here?" she asked, her voice firm. "I think we all know what happened." Denise's actions with Malik Thompson weren't just a simple mistake. She ignored proper procedures, took over private property without permission, and now she's made a complete fool of herself on all of us. There were murmurs of agreement around the room. Cha could see Denise's face, reaming her fingers, digging into the table. But she didn't say anything. She was trying to maintain her composure, but it was clear that the weight of the situation was sinking in. Patricia Lopez continued, "This isn't about one person's wedding. This is about how Barbara Whitmore has treated the rest of us. She's bullied neighbors, fined us for the smallest infractions and act like she's above the law, and now she's made us the laughingstock of the entire neighborhood." A few others chimed in, voicing their frustrations with Denise's reign. Malik Thompson listened, his face a picture of calm, while inside he felt a sense of satisfaction growing. The tide had turned, and Denise's supporters were starting to dwindle. The cracks in her armor were becoming impossible to ignore. When the room finally quieted, Malik Thompson stood up. He hadn't intended to speak right away, but the opportunity presented itself, and he knew it was time. He walked to the front of the room, his presence commanding attention. "Good afternoon, everyone." He began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "I'm sure you're all aware of the situation by now, but I want to make something crystal clear. This isn't just about one incident. This is about the abuse of power. This is about a person who used her position to manipulate others, to push us around, and to impose rules that made no sense. I don't know about you, but, I've had enough." Malik Thompson paused, letting his words settle in. He could see Denise's eyes narrow as she glared at him, but he wasn't fazed. He had come prepared. "I'm not here to fight to petty battles," Malik Thompson continued. "I'm here because Barbara Whitmore crossed the line. She took what wasn't hers, my property, and used it for her own gain. She didn't ask, didn't negotiate. Oh, she just took. And when I called her out, she responded with lies, little threats, and a complete disregard for what's right." He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. He slid it onto the table, and the rustling sound of paper filled the room. "I have here in black and white the evidence that proves Barbara Whitmore has been overstepping her bounds for years. Complaints from neighbors. Emails where she's instructed people to pay fines for ridiculous reasons, and even footage of her setting up that wedding without any proper approval." The room fell silent as Malik Thompson flipped through the folder and passed out copies of the evidence. "I'm not asking for anything unreasonable," he said. "I'm asking for accountability. The HOA board needs to do what's all right, and that means removing Barbara Whitmore from her position as president." Malik Thompson's words hung in the air like a challenge. Yet he could see Denise's face turning pale as she realized the full extent of the evidence stacked against her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The room waited for her response, but none came. The support she once had was slipping away fast. A few moments passed before one of the board members, a man named Douglas Grant, cleared his throat. "I think it's clear where this is going," he said. Denise, would you like to respond?" Barbara Whitmore finally found her voice, but it was shaky. This isn't fair," she stammered. "I've always worked hard for this community." Hard," Malik Thompson interrupted. "You've made people's lives miserable, Denise. You've exploited your position for personal gain, and now you want to act like the victim. You don't deserve to represent anyone here." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. The board members exchanged looks, and Malik Thompson could see that the vote was already leaning in his favor. Within an hour, the vote was cast. The result was unanimous. Barbara Whitmore was removed as HOA president. Malik Thompson didn't say a word as he stood up and walked out of the room. He knew this was only the beginning, but for the first time, He felt like he had truly won. Malik Thompson had barely returned to his porch when his phone rang, and he didn't need to check the caller ID. He already knew who it was. The voice on the other end was frantic, almost desperate. It was Denise, and she was not happy. "You think this is over, don't you?" Denise's voice came through the phone, tightly controlled, but filled with barely contained fury. "You think you've won because the HOA removed me as president. You're wrong, Malik Thompson. You're going to regret this." Malik Thompson leaned back in his chair, the warmth of the afternoon sun settling on his shoulders. He could hear the tremor in Denise's voice, but it didn't faze him. After all, this had been the goal from the beginning, to expose her for who she really was. It had manipulated the neighborhood for years, imposing her will on people who didn't have the resources or the patience to fight back. But Malik Thompson had been patient, and now the tide was turning. "Denise, I think you're confused," Malik Thompson replied calmly, his voice smooth as silk. "This isn't about me winning. This is about justice. You tried to push everyone around, and now you're the one who's being held accountable. You've made a lot of enemies, and that's not something you can just fix by throwing a tantrum." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear Denise's teeth grinding in frustration. Finally, she spoke again, but this time her voice was different. It was colder. "You think you've won, but there's always a way around the rules, Malik Thompson. You can't keep me down forever. I've got connections, and I'll make sure you regret ever crossing me." Malik Thompson didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward and pulled out the folder he had presented at the HOA meeting the day before. It felt satisfying to hold it in his hands. He had everything he needed to keep the pressure on Denise, even if she tried to weasel her way back into power. "I'm not worried about your connections, niece." Chuck said, his tone steady. "What I'm worried about is the people you've hurt, the neighbors who've been afraid of you, the people who've been fined for no reason, the families who've been made to feel like they're doing something wrong for just living their lives. That's who I'm fighting for. And I'll continue to fight for them whether you like it or not." Denise's silence was answer enough. Malik Thompson could almost hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out her next move. He didn't give her the chance to reply before he hung up, a small smirk playing on his lips. It wasn't over yet. He had a feeling that Barbara Whitmore wasn't going to let this go quietly, but he was ready for whatever she threw his way. The next day, Malik Thompson's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a message from Jasmine Reed, one of his neighbors who had been at the Outweigh meeting and had supported Malik Thompson's efforts to woo Denise. "Malik Thompson, you won't believe this. Barbara Whitmore is trying to send an inspector to your property today. She's claiming that your dock doesn't meet safety standards and that it's a hazard to the community. She's desperate to get back at you." Malik Thompson raised an eyebrow as he read the message. He'd been expecting something like this, but it was still irritating to see just how far Barbara Whitmore was willing to go to settle a grudge. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about her trying to undermine him and regain control. He responded quickly, his message short and to the point. "Oh, thanks for the heads up, Jasmine Reed. Let her send whoever she wants. I've got all the paperwork I need." Malik Thompson had dealt with his fair share of bureaucracy over the years. He knew how to handle an inspector, especially one who was being sent under dubious pretenses. He wasn't going to let Barbara Whitmore win this round, not after everything he'd fought for. Later that afternoon, Malik Thompson was sitting on his porch when he saw a car pull up to his driveway. It wasn't a surprise to see the official-looking vehicle with the inspector's name on the side, but it still made his blood boil. He stood up, walked down the steps of his porch, and greeted the inspector with a smile that was just wide enough to make the man feel uncomfortable. "Good afternoon." Malik Thompson said, his voice calm and welcoming. "I'm guessing you're here on behalf of the HOA. The inspector, a middle-aged man with a clipboard under his arm, nodded. "Yes, I've been instructed to inspect the dock for safety violations. There have been concerns about its condition and whether, it meets community standards." A shack raised an eyebrow. "Concerns, huh? I'll tell you this. Everything about that dock is up to code. I've got the permits, the inspections, the paperwork. You're welcome to look, but I'm not going to waste your time if you're just here to harass me. The inspector hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Well, I'll need to take a look just to make sure everything is in order. Malik Thompson didn't argue. He led the inspector down to the dock where they both stood overlooking the water. Malik Thompson had worked hard to maintain the dock over the years, and there wasn't a single safety issue. The inspector began scribbling down notes, but after a few minutes he stopped and turned to Shock with a sheepish expression. I have to admit, everything here looks perfectly fine. No violations, no safety issues. I don't see anything that would be a concern for the community. Malik Thompson nodded, his smirk barely contained. Funny, isn't it? How someone can make accusations based on nothing but spite and personal vendettas. The inspector looked uncomfortable but didn't respond. Malik Thompson could tell he was just doing his job, but the situation still amused him. Denise's attempt to send someone after him had backfired again. Feel free to let your supervisor know that everything's in order, Malik Thompson said, turning to walk back to his porch. And you might want to let Barbara Whitmore know that I'm not someone she can intimidate. As the inspector left without a word, Malik Thompson felt a sense of quiet triumph. He had won this round just like he had won the HOA meeting. Denise's tactics were transparent, and it was only a matter of time before the board realized she wasn't worth their time or energy. By the time the day ended, Malik Thompson had already heard from several neighbors who had witnessed Denise's petty retaliation attempts. Some had even offered their support, telling him they were ready to speak out against Barbara Whitmore if the board needed more proof of her abuse of power. Malik Thompson's reputation in the neighborhood was growing and Denise's was crumbling, but he knew the fight wasn't over yet. Barbara Whitmore might be down, but she wasn't out. She would find another way to retaliate. But Malik Thompson was ready. He always had been. One thing was for sure, no one would be floating a wedding off his dock again. The evening air was cool, the kind of breeze that whispered of autumn creeping in despite the summer's persistence. Malik Thompson sat on his porch, a glass of lemonade in his hand, watching the sunset paint the sky with rich hues of orange and pink. The neighborhood had quieted down after the drama the past few weeks, but Malik Thompson knew better than to think the fight was over. Barbara Whitmore had been silent for a while now, but silence from someone like her was never a sign of surrender. It was merely the calm before the storm. Sure enough, the storm came the next morning. Malik Thompson had just finished his breakfast and was preparing to step out onto the dock when a car pulled up to his driveway. This time, it wasn't an inspector. It wasn't a neighbor either. It was a building inspector with a badge that looked far more official than it needed to be. The man stepped out of the car, slowly clipboard in hand, scanning the property as though it were an industrial site about to undergo a full safety audit. Malik Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" Malik Thompson called out from the porch, his voice even, but laced with curiosity. The inspector turned toward him, nodding. "Yes, sir. I'm here on behalf of the city, following up on an anonymous complaint regarding potential safety violations on your dock." Malik Thompson's S. Douglas Grantach sank for a moment, but he kept his expression neutral. The HOA was clearly pulling out all the stops. Now Barbara Whitmore was trying something else, using the system to retaliate instead of going directly after him. She had sent a so-called inspector to look over his property, but Malik Thompson wasn't about to be intimidated. "And who made this complaint?" Malik Thompson asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. The inspector hesitated for a brief moment before responding. Sorry, I'm not at liberty to disclose that information, but I'm sure it won't take long. Just a quick check to ensure everything is in compliance." Malik Thompson exhaled, his thoughts racing. He knew what this was. This wasn't a genuine safety inspection. It was a petty attempt to harass him, likely instigated by Denise. But Malik Thompson had anticipated this. If she thought she could use the system to her advantage, she was sorely mistaken. "Sure, go ahead," Malik Thompson said, gesturing toward the dock. But just so you know, everything is up to code. All permits are valid, and my dock's condition has passed every inspection I've had over the years. You won't find anything to report." The inspector nodded, still scribbling on his clipboard, but Malik Thompson saw the uncertainty in his movements. The man didn't want to be here any more than Malik Thompson wanted him there. It was clear that the inspector wasn't fully on board with, whatever this was. As the inspector walked toward the dock, Malik Thompson stepped back inside, grabbing the folder that had become his armor during this entire ordeal. He had kept all the relevant documents, permits, previous inspection reports, and legal certifications locked away and ready to be presented at a moment's notice. When the inspector returned to the front porch, his face was drawn and there was an uncomfortable tension in the air. He handed the clipboard to Malik Thompson and cleared his throat. "Everything checks out, sir," the inspector said quietly. "Your dock is fully compliant with all local safety standards. There are no issues here." Malik Thompson raised an eyebrow, pretending to glance over the papers the man handed him. "No issues, huh? That's funny considering this complaint seemed urgent enough to send you here." I wonder where it came from then. Anyone tell you who reported it?" The inspector shifted uneasily, but didn't answer. Malik Thompson wasn't surprised. The inspector was just a pawn in Denise's game sent to do the bidding of someone who had long since abused their power. "Thanks for your time," Malik Thompson said with a smile, his voice laced with irony. "But I think I'll be forwarding this information to the local authorities. I wouldn't want anyone thinking there's something fishy going on around here." With that, Malik Thompson turned and walked back inside, leaving the inspector standing on the porch with no further words to say. The next day, Malik Thompson received a phone call from Jasmine Reed, one of his supporters. "Malik Thompson, you won't believe this," she said, her voice practically bubbling over with excitement. "The inspector you had come by, he just admitted to me that he was sent by Denise. He was instructed to find something, anything to report. But the whole thing backfired. He told me everything, Malik Thompson. She's been trying to set you up from the start." Malik Thompson smiled, leaning back in his chair. "That figures," he said, shaking his head. "Barbara Whitmore is getting desperate. She's playing a dangerous game now, though, and it's one she's not going to win." The call ended, but Malik Thompson's mind was already working. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about making sure Barbara Whitmore understood the full weight of her actions. She couldn't keep playing games with him, trying to manipulate the system. Malik Thompson had already called the local authorities to inform them of the inspector's questionable actions. The complaint and the subsequent inspection were going to be flagged as retaliation. Malik Thompson had one more move to make. It was time to bring the final hammer down. That evening, Malik Thompson attended the next HOA meeting. The room was filled with the usual crowd of neighbors, most of whom had long since turned against Barbara Whitmore after the viral wedding debacle. He walked to the front of the room holding a thick folder of documents. "Good evening, everyone," Shag began, his voice calm and controlled. "We've all seen how things have played out over the past few weeks. Denise's behavior has been less than exemplary, to put it mildly, but it seems like she's not quite finished. Just today, I had an inspector sent to my property under the pretense of a safety violation. I've got all the proof I need to show that it was a deliberate attempt to harass me." The room grew still as Malik Thompson pulled out the documents. The inspector's report, the city's acknowledgement of Denise's role, and even a few more pieces of evidence from the previous months showing Denise's ongoing abuse of power. "I've already filed a report with the local authorities," Malik Thompson continued. "And I'm making sure everyone knows the truth about what's been going on here, but I'm not done yet. I've got all the support I need, and it's time for Barbara Whitmore to face the consequences of her actions." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Denise, seated at the back of the room, looked as though she might burst into flames with rage, but there was nothing she could do. Malik Thompson had played his hand perfectly. The HOA board members looked at each other silently, agreeing on the severity of the situation. After a long, tense silence, the board spoke. The decision was unanimous. Barbara Whitmore was to be officially removed from the HOA and barred from holding any further positions in the organization. Malik Thompson walked out of the meeting with a quiet sense of triumph. Barbara Whitmore had tried to play dirty, but she had underestimated him at every turn. And now her time in power was over. But Malik Thompson knew one thing for sure. No one messed with his dock, and no one messed with his neighborhood without facing the consequences. The first few days after the HOA meeting felt surreal to Malik Thompson. Barbara Whitmore's removal had sent ripples and rue the community, but not the kind she was used to causing. The neighborhood, which had been under the tight grip of her authoritarian reign for far too long, felt lighter. There was an almost palpable sense of relief in the air, like the oppressive weight that had hung over everyone for years had been lifted. Neighbors were beginning to speak up more, sharing stories of the petty fines, unreasonable demands, and harassment they had endured under Denise's leadership. For the first time in a long while, people were starting to feel like they could breathe again. And Schick had spent the days following the HOA meeting making the rounds. He had always been a good neighbor, quiet, respectful, and willing to lend a hand when needed. But now it felt as if his relationship with the people around him was stronger than ever. He stopped by a few houses to check in on neighbors he hadn't spoken to much before. They welcomed him with open arms, and the gratitude they expressed made him realize just how much Denise's reign had affected them. That weekend, a small block party was held in Schick's honor. It wasn't something he had expected, but it felt like the right thing to do. It was a celebration not just of his victory over Denise, but of the community coming together. For once, people weren't afraid to mingle, to talk to each other, to enjoy the simple pleasure of good food and conversation without the fear of being fined for some trivial infraction. Malik Thompson stood in the middle of the gathering, a beer in hand, surrounded by neighbors who were finally able to enjoy themselves without the constant threat of the HOA hanging over their heads. Laughter filled the air as kids ran around with balloons and the older crowd played cornhole or chatted in groups. The atmosphere was relaxed, warm, something Malik Thompson had never really experienced before in his own backyard. Raymond Carter, one of Malik Thompson's closest allies in the neighborhood, approached him with a smile. "You know, I never thought we'd see the day when Barbara Whitmore was gone, but I have to admit you really pulled it off. This place is starting to feel like home again." Malik Thompson smiled back, raising his beer in a small toast. "It's not just me, Raymond Carter. It's everyone. We all made this happen. Barbara Whitmore couldn't do this to us anymore because we finally stood up for ourselves. We're stronger now." Raymond Carter nodded, looking around the yard with a contented sigh. "You know it, it's crazy. For years, we've all just been quietly putting up with her, but now people are finally starting to talk about what she did. I think a lot of us were just afraid of her power, afraid of what she might do next. But now, people, feel free." "Yeah," she said, his voice thoughtful. "Freedom. It's a powerful thing, but it's also fragile. We've got to keep an eye on things. Make sure someone like Barbara Whitmore doesn't slip back in." Raymond Carter chuckled. "Don't worry about that. I think the whole neighborhood's had enough. If anyone tries to pull a stunt like that again, they'll have a whole army of people coming after them." Malik Thompson laughed along with him. The mood was light, but he wasn't mistaken about the underlying sentiment. This was just the beginning. They had taken down one oppressive force, but the community had to stay vigilant. One person with too much power could unravel all the progress they'd made. But for now, he allowed himself to bask in the camaraderie and joy of the moment. Barbara Whitmore was gone, and the neighborhood was starting to rebuild itself. A week later, Malik Thompson stood at the end of his dock watching as a family he had never spoken to before set up for a small picnic by the water. The dad waved at him, and Malik Thompson waved back. He had seen them around the neighborhood before, but today they seemed more relaxed, more comfortable. It was a reminder of the change that had come. People were starting to take ownership of their spaces again. Schick's dock, once a point of contention, was now a symbol of freedom, a place where people could enjoy the simple pleasures of life without fear of being penalized for their every move. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the sun was shining brightly. The world felt lighter now. Somehow, he didn't have to worry about Denise's next move, or whether he would get an unexpected fine for having a barbecue or a few too many chairs on his lawn. He was free to do what he wanted, and so was everyone else in the neighborhood. It felt like a small victory, but an important one. He glanced at the dock, now completely rebuilt. It wasn't just a dock anymore. It was a statement. He had rebuilt it stronger, bigger, and better. Something to symbolize not only his victory, but the resilience of the community that had fought alongside him. He'd even added a plaque to the dock, a little piece of humor to mark the occasion. The Liberty Launch. It was a nod to the idea of freedom, and it made Malik Thompson smile every time he saw it. The doorbell rang, and Malik Thompson went inside to answer. It was Jasmine Reed, her smile wide and genuine. "Hey, Malik Thompson." She greeted him, holding a plate of cookies. "I thought I'd drop these off." And she paused, glancing behind her. "We've got something for you." Malik Thompson raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's this?" Jasmine Reed stepped aside, and behind her a group of neighbors stood with a banner. It read, "Thank you, Oshek, for saving our neighborhood." Malik Thompson blinked slightly, taken aback by the gesture. "You guys didn't have to do this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Oh, we did," Jasmine Reed said, walking forward to hand him the banner. "We all did. You gave us our neighborhood back. You gave us our voices back. This is the least we can do." Malik Thompson smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "This is more than I ever expected, Jasmine Reed. Thank you. But really, it's all of us. We're a team. We fought for this, and we're going to keep fighting for what's right." As the days turned into weeks, the neighborhood transformed. Families once silenced by fear and intimidation now swam freely in the lake. People threw block parties and impromptu get-togethers. The tension that had once defined their lives had melted away, replaced by a sense of unity and community. Shacktok stood proudly at the edge of the water, its new name a symbol of the fight for freedom. But as much as he cherished the victory, Wee Shuck knew that the real win wasn't in the dock or the community party. It was in the simple fact that the people of Clearwater Lake had taken back control of their lives. They had reclaimed their right to live without fear. And as he watched the sunset from the dock, Malik Thompson couldn't help but think that this was just the beginning of something even bigger. He'd fought for justice once, but he'd also seen what a community could do when it stood together. No one would ever take that away from them again. Malik Thompson sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over Clearwater Lake. It had been weeks since the HOA meeting, weeks since Barbara Whitmore had been removed from her position as president, and the neighborhood had never felt more peaceful. The tension that had once defined every conversation, every interaction had dissolved into a comfortable camaraderie that Malik Thompson had never thought possible. The block parties were in full swing, families gathered freely by the water, and laughter echoed in the air. It was everything he had fought for. And more. Malik Thompson could hardly believe how quickly everything had changed. Once the threat of Barbara Whitmore had been eliminated, the neighborhood seemed to come to alive. People were taking ownership of their community again, fixing fences, cleaning up their yards, and even starting new projects that had been put off for years. The residents who had once kept to themselves were now chatting in their front yards. Kids were playing without a worry in the world. And for the first time in a long time, there was a real sense of unity. As for Shag, he had used this time to rebuild his dock, giving it the care and attention it deserved. The Liberty Launch, as he had named it, was now not only a symbol of victory, but also a new beginning for the entire neighborhood. It stood tall and strong, a testament to resilience, to standing up for what was right. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride every time he walked past it. The name plaque was a reminder that he had fought not just for his property, but for the freedom of everyone around him. But peace, as Shah had learned, was often a fleeting thing. Just when he thought everything was finally in its place, something new always seemed to emerge. It was a Saturday evening, and Malik Thompson was enjoying a rare moment of solitude on his porch when he noticed a familiar figure walking toward him. It was his neighbor Eric Daniels, a man he had spoken to a few times over the years, but had never really gotten to know. Eric Daniels was holding a toolbox in one hand and looking a little sheepish. "Hey, Malik Thompson," Eric Daniels called out, raising a hand. "Got a minute?" Malik Thompson put down his lemonade and stood up, waving back. "Sure, Eric Daniels. What's up?" And Eric Daniels walked up the steps of the porch, glancing around as if he were trying to find the right words. "So, I've been meaning to talk to you for a while. And, well, I figured now's as good a time as any." Malik Thompson raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Eric Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Well, it's about the zip line." Malik Thompson's heart sank for a moment, but he kept his cool. Zip line. "What zip line?" "The one being installed over there," Eric Daniels said, pointing to a spot just a few houses down. "I know you've been pretty chill about the neighborhood lately, but I figured I should let you know. Someone's putting up a zip line that crosses over your porch." Malik Thompson stared at Eric Daniels for a moment, taking in the news. He wasn't exactly a fan of extreme sports, and the thought of someone zipping across his porch wasn't exactly appealing, but it was clear that Eric Daniels wasn't the one behind the installation. "Who's behind this?" Malik Thompson asked, his voice calm, but with a hint of concern. Eric Daniels looked uneasy. "I think it's Chase Morgan from next door. He's been talking about it for weeks. He's always so vague about it. I just don't want you to be caught off guard." Malik Thompson nodded slowly, his mind already running through the possibilities. He'd always known that peace in a neighborhood could be short-lived, especially when everyone suddenly had the freedom to do whatever they pleased. A zip line crossing over his porch wasn't the worst thing that could happen, but it wasn't exactly something he was thrilled about either. "I appreciate the heads up, Eric Daniels," Malik Thompson said, his voice calm. "I'll go talk to Chase Morgan and figure this out." Eric Daniels seemed relieved. "Thanks, Malik Thompson. I knew you'd handle it. I just didn't want you to wake up one morning and find someone flying through the air right over your head." Malik Thompson laughed, his tense posture relaxing. "Yeah, that would be a bit of a surprise." After Eric Daniels left, Malik Thompson spent a few minutes contemplating the situation. He wasn't the type to stir up trouble, but at the same time, he didn't want to let things get out of hand. The neighborhood had just started to find its rhythm, and a zip line running over his porch wasn't exactly conducive to that peaceful atmosphere. He'd have to speak with Chase Morgan, explain his concerns, and hopefully come to a solution that worked for everyone. It was the kind of thing that could turn into a bigger issue if left unchecked. But Malik Thompson wasn't about to let it ruin the progress they had made. Later that afternoon, Malik Thompson made his way over to Chase Morgan's house. Chase Morgan was in his garage tinkering with the equipment for the zip line, looking focused and excited. "Hey, Chase Morgan," Malik Thompson called out, leaning against the garage door frame. Chase Morgan looked up and grinned, wiping his hands on a rag. "Oh, hey, Malik Thompson." What's up?" Malik Thompson took a deep breath. "I wanted to talk to you about the zip line. I heard you were putting one up over my porch, and I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page here." Chase Morgan blinked in surprise. "Oh, I didn't think you'd mind. It's just a bit of fun, you know. Everyone's been talking about it, and it'll be a great addition to the neighborhood." Malik Thompson raised a hand to interrupt. "I get that, Chase Morgan. I really do. But having a zip line cross over my porch, it's a little much. I don't mind people having fun, but I don't want to feel like I'm going to get run over every time I step outside." Chase Morgan looked a little taken back, but nodded. "I get it. Malik Thompson, I wasn't thinking about how why might affect you. Just thought it would be a cool thing for everyone. I'm all for having fun. Malik Thompson said, his voice firm but friendly. But we've got to make sure it doesn't interfere with other people's space. I'm sure we can come up with a solution that works for both of us. Chase Morgan thought for a moment, then smiled sheepishly. You're right, Malik Thompson. Maybe I can move the zip line over to the other side of my yard so it doesn't cross your porch. I'll make sure it doesn't affect your space. Malik Thompson nodded, his tension easing. That sounds like a good plan. Beach it. Let's make sure everyone has a good time without stepping on anyone else's toes. The situation was resolved with no hard feelings. Chase Morgan moved the zip line, and it became a new neighborhood attraction, far enough from Malik Thompson's porch to avoid any potential mishaps. The community had proven that it was capable of handling even the smallest disagreements with respect and cooperation. As Malik Thompson sat back on his porch later that evening, watching the stars slowly fill the night sky, he reflected on the journey he had been through. The neighborhood had come together to take down one of their biggest obstacles, and now it was thriving. And sure, there would always be small bumps along the way, issues to work out, people to talk to, but the important thing was that they were no longer living in fear. They had reclaimed their peace, and they weren't going to let anyone take it away. But Malik Thompson knew that one thing was for sure. No matter what, he would always fight to protect his space, his community, and his peace. And as he leaned back in his chair, a soft laugh escaped his lips. "Guess the battle's never really over," he muttered to himself, and smiling at the thought of the neighborhood's next adventure. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it drifts, slowly, silently, until it lands right where it needs to. What happened on that dock wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries, respect, and reminding people that kindness is never a weakness, but neither is standing your ground. Frank Delgado thought no one would stand up to him. But that day, the lake spoke louder than words ever could. And maybe, just maybe, it reminded all of us that community only works when there's mutual respect, not entitlement disguised as charm. Now here's where we ask you, was I too harsh? Or was that floating wedding the wake-up call our neighborhood desperately needed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We know this one might stir up some strong opinions, and we want to hear them all. If you found yourself hooked by this story, please give it a like, share it with someone who's ever had a Frank Delgado in their life, and subscribe to Soulful Stories I4 for more real, raw, and reflective tales that make you laugh, gasp, and think. Because sometimes the most unforgettable stories start right in your own backyard.